Is Signal even secure enough for this? And what I've looked into, it does not seem to matter. Like, yes, Signal
Right.
is more secure than WhatsApp, which is quite literally the lowest bar you could expect to clear for anything. But it's not. It doesn't matter if it's secure as an app because the phones aren't necessarily secure. So
Once you can hack into the phone, you're able to access all the apps on that phone, one of which is Signal.
exactly. It's also worth noting that because officials aren't supposed to be using Signal, and a government-issued phone shouldn't have Signal installed on it, it is quite likely that they're using personal phones for Signal. I'm not sure that that's been completely confirmed yet, but the government phones aren't supposed to have the app available on it at all, or any other commercially available communication app.
Yeah.
So if the phone's not secure, it doesn't matter what the apps individually are like.
Right.
And by all accounts, in this situation, they were not secure. Der Spiegel, a German news website, was able to find phone information, including in some cases password data for Waltz, Hegseth, and Gabbard, a feat that they described as particularly easy. It was also concluded that Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine and the Middle East, was currently in Russia while participating in this group chat.
I think what's even scarier, though, just to maybe get my conspiracy theory hat on, also related to Der Spiegel, is that it was actually discovered that Hegseth does, in fact, have a Russian email address. And it kind of feels like sometimes maybe the real discovery here is that we should be focusing on whatever is in that email account. It drives me nuts that we kind of decided that there's no way the Trump-Russia hoax was real.
Yeah.
When in reality, I think if you look at all of his actions since taking office back in 2017, all of it sure feels like Russia has information on the Trump administration. And Hegseth having a Russian email just seems like it kind of feeds into that.
That does dovetail in quite nicely because the current speculation exists that this was an intentional obfuscation of the communication records after the communications were used against him in the Mueller investigation during his first term. Now, I don't know that this can be completely confirmed at this point. Can we say what Trump explicitly wants and doesn't when he's, for all accounts, really didn't seem to know about this group chat? I mean, even when he was first pressed with it and they were talking about what about Pete Hegseth in this Signal group chat, he said, "What are we talking about Pete Hegseth for? What? He's a great guy. What are we talking about him for?" And it's like, Grandpa, he's literally the guy. He's the one that did the thing. And like, there's tons of times where he lies and he's just like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And look, I can't know, but it did not, watching the video, seem like he was lying. It seemed like he was truly clueless about the situation. But it would not be beyond reason that his whole administration is like, I don't like that they kept, I use all the official channels and they just like held those against me. We shouldn't do that. Let's put them on other places, especially because in this group chat, in the Signal group chat, after they had already discussed all these things, Mike Waltz, I believe it was Mike Waltz that made the changed it to where the records are supposed to be deleted after 4 weeks. So like an auto delete thing on there. And it does seem like it is an intentional desire to hide the records of this conversation. That very much backfired. Another thing that was deliciously ironic was that in the group chat at the beginning, they were talking about, should we postpone this whole thing for a month? And everybody was like, actually, there'd be no problem if we did that. It would change two things, but not really adjust the overall calculus. We'd be fine with doing that. And then ultimately decided, well, what are the downsides? Well, this could leak and we'd look indecisive. And it's like, boy, oh boy, did it leak? And that's not the take we have.
I even think, if you really look into it, it kind of sort of feeds into Trump's megalomania. I think the real reason he doesn't have strong takes on this is that part of me just thinks that he's a little bit hurt that he wasn't included. I think he really wishes one of his numbers was associated with this group chat, even if he himself would not be chiming in. You know what I mean? Like, I think in his face, like, you should be adding my phone because I don't check it anyway. And that way I would get the credit and feel strong and silent while you guys do all the real work.
I mean, that is very possible. Well, there is, because we talked about this with Doge back off pod several weeks ago, where there is this genius thing of, with Doge, Elon gets to take all the flack for making all the decisions that Trump would benefit from and kind of wants in the first place. And there is something genius about putting other people out there to do it, and you just get credit because it's your administration.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think he's quite confident that he'll get away with taking the credit for everything and letting everyone else get the flag.
Because he will.
Yeah.
But going back to the why are they using Signal, the speculation on this obfuscation, it's worth noting that like the documents that Trump hid in Mar-a-Lago and refused to give back after Biden won, and it was like, hey, you can't have these documents anymore. And he was like, oh, yeah, sure. And they're like, so you're going to give him back? And he was like, I'm not going to do that. And then they're like, okay, well, here's a court order saying you have to do that. And his response was to hide them, which I don't know if you ever seen the photo. I heard about it for a while. I looked up the photo recently for this, and I kind of just imagined it was like a couple manila folders. It was like 20 boxes stacked, like 20 cardboard boxes full of documents stacked up in his bathroom next to like a gilded toilet. Yeah. It was very, very absurd to see. And it should be noted that even in this leak, a lot of conservative pundits and politicians are talking about, oh, what about Hillary with her email server? When it's like a group chat, how is that fundamentally different from an email server if you're trying to hide it and separating it and deleting stuff? And it's also like we're then like, oh, what about Biden when he had documents next to his Porsche in his garage? And it's like, well, yeah, Biden had those files, and then he returned them without being asked. Whereas again, Trump defied a court order to hide them. So it's like, why are you guys even bringing this up? One of the biggest rabble-rousing points I see from people getting on both sides of the aisle very upset about this is, does this leak constitute a breach of the Espionage Act? Because he's leaking operational things that are potentially classified to just whoever, you know?
If theoretically Pete Hegseth did not have the authority to declassify these kinds of details, this would absolutely be a violation of the Espionage Act, which is essentially, stop leaking classified data. It's a pretty simple act, especially to people who might be on the other side. And this is what really bothers me, is that it's actually within that Mar-a-Lago documents case that this case sort of becomes relevant again. Because essentially, Trump was able to successfully argue that because he is president, he was allowed to declassify all of the documents in a bathroom in Mar-a-Lago.
It's so absurd.
I can't believe I got to live long enough to say a sentence like that. But essentially, we're at the same case here. Hegseth is allowed to declassify whatever the hell he wants when it comes to things like OPSEC. And that's what he did here for this strike. Or at the very least, that's what they're now going to say he did here in order to make sure he doesn't run afoul of the Espionage Act. This is why elections matter. Unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say this because this is a point. Is there an argument that he has to have announced that it was declassified before this came out, or intentionally? Because like the fact that he said this all to people who would have authorization and accidentally said it to a journalist, is there any argument that, oh, you didn't actually declassify it officially before giving it to him because you didn't intentionally do that?
And unfortunately, that probably used to be the case, but post-Trump and the Mar-a-Lago documents case, that is no longer the case. Because it's very clear that Trump declassified those documents in his mind, according to his own arguments. So, unfortunately, once we were basically able to be like, okay, fine, that will not be a thing that we pursue to any real degree, suddenly that's the case here as well. Or at least that seems to be the case. The other thing that we also have to remember is that they control the Justice Department. So this is the kind of thing that Democrats would be forced to have an independent counsel sort of look over and deal with. And this is definitely the kind of thing that Republicans won't ever bring up again the moment we stop bringing it up.